This week on Sister Wives, what was supposed to be an apology turns into something far more uncomfortable, and honestly, far more revealing. Cody Brown finally sits down with Christine and her husband David, and what comes out of his mouth is not accountability, not closure, but a strange mix of regret, poetry, and revisionist history. And the more he talks, the worse it gets. Because this conversation exposes something deeper than a failed marriage. It exposes a man who still does not understand what he did wrong. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So stay with me because this gets more unsettling the longer it goes. This week on Sister Wives, everything feels different from the very first moment because the energy is tense in a way that makes you lean closer to the screen, knowing something uncomfortable is coming, even if you cannot yet name it. And as Christine and David sit down across from Cody Brown, the weight of years of unresolved pain hangs in the air, creating a silence that speaks louder than any dialogue. And when Cody begins what he calls an apology, it becomes immediately clear that this is not going to unfold the way anyone expects, because instead of grounding himself in accountability, he drifts almost instantly into abstraction, into reflection, into language that sounds thoughtful on the surface, but never quite lands where it should. And that is where the unease starts to build, because viewers are waiting for something simple, something direct, something human. But what we get instead is a winding explanation that seems more focused on how Cody feels about the past than how Christine lived through it. And when he says he is sorry for telling her he never loved her, the moment feels heavy but incomplete, because that statement alone does not capture the years of distance, the emotional withdrawal, the conditional affection, and the repeated implication that she was somehow failing him as a wife. And as he continues speaking, the discomfort grows, because rather than staying with that apology, he pivots unexpectedly into describing their relationship as beautiful, poetic, meaningful, like a storm at sunset, language that immediately contradicts the very regret he just expressed. And it leaves everyone watching trying to reconcile. Analytical and steady, Mary was emotionally intense and deeply bonded. These were not mysteries, and pretending they were now feels like an attempt to distance himself from responsibility. And the more he speaks, the clearer it becomes that he is not engaging with Christine as a person, but with the idea of their marriage as a chapter in his own story. And David recognizes this immediately, which is why he states plainly that Cody is not available and that they are not asking for an apology, because pursuing accountability from someone who cannot offer it only prolongs harm. And that boundary becomes one of the most grounded moments in the episode, because it refuses to participate in the emotional loop Cody keeps creating. And when viewers revisit earlier seasons, this pattern becomes undeniable. The dismissal of Christine's feelings, the mocking tone, the repeated implication that she needed to change to earn love. These were not isolated incidents. They were a system, and systems do not disappear simply because someone reframes the narrative. And that is why this apology feels so disconnected from reality. Because reality includes the footage, the interviews, the patterns, and Christine herself has been consistent from the very beginning. She expressed doubt, she expressed pain, she expressed frustration, and nothing ever truly improved. And so when Cody now speaks of beauty and poetry, it feels less like growth and more like revision. And viewers can sense that dissonance because the story they watch does not align with the story being told now. And that gap creates a tension that keeps building because we keep waiting for the moment where he finally names the harm directly. But instead, the conversation keeps circling, pulling us forward, making us wonder if the next sentence will finally be the one that lands. And it never does. And that unresolved feeling lingers long after the scene ends, because it mirrors the entire history of this relationship. Conversations without resolution, needs without acknowledgement, and pain without accountability. And as the episode moves forward, it becomes clear that this is not about closure at all. It is about control of narrative and legacy. And that realization reframes everything that follows and leaves viewers with a sense of emotional suspension, because the chapter is ending, but the truth is still hanging in the air, waiting to be fully spoken. As the conversation moves forward, the tension does not ease. Instead, it deepens because the more Cody speaks, the clearer it becomes that he still does not understand why his words are failing to land. And that realization alone keeps viewers locked in, because we are watching someone attempt to repair something without fully acknowledging what broke it in the first place. And when he begins reflecting on how he married Mary, then Janelle, then Christine, he frames it as momentum, as obedience, as an eagerness to live a belief system rather than a series of emotional commitments. And while that may be honest, it also exposes the core issue that these marriages were often treated as roles to be filled rather than relationships to be nurtured. And that framing becomes especially uncomfortable when he says he was not supposed to fall in love, because it raises an unavoidable question about what the women in these marriages were expected to feel for decades, and how much emotional labor they were asked to carry in silence. And that discomfort grows as he continues speaking about how the experience was meaningful to him, how it was romantic to him, even if it was not for Christine. And that distinction lands hard because it highlights the imbalance that existed throughout their relationship, where his experience took priority and hers was something she was expected to manage quietly. And Christine does not challenge him aggressively. She does not argue, she does not interrupt, but her calm presence becomes its own form of resistance because she does not validate the reframing. And that refusal is powerful because it denies the emotional closure Cody seems to be seeking. And David sits beside her, steady and observant, offering no dramatic reaction, but clearly signaling that he understands exactly what is happening. And this dynamic creates a contrast that is impossible to ignore, because while Cody speaks in abstractions, David represents presence. And that contrast becomes even sharper when Cody begins to describe the marriage in front of Christine's new husband, using language that crosses an emotional boundary that should never need explanation. Because once a relationship ends and someone moves on, reflections like that belong in private, not shared as if they still hold emotional claim. And that moment shifts the entire tone of the conversation because it suggests that on some level, Cody still views Christine through a lens of ownership. And that realization is deeply unsettling. And yet, David remains composed, which only underscores his emotional maturity. And that restraint speaks volumes because it refuses to escalate while still maintaining a boundary. And this is where viewers begin to recognize that this conversation is no longer about healing. It is about narrative control and legacy, and how Cody wants this chapter remembered. And that understanding reframes everything, including the religious language that has often been used to justify hierarchy within the family. Because when faith is invoked without compassion, it stops being spiritual and becomes transactional. And throughout the history of this family, submission was emphasized without mutuality, authority without accountability, and the expectation that respect should flow in one direction only was treated as righteousness rather than imbalance. And even within the belief system itself, that approach is inconsistent because the teachings often cited emphasize humility, care, and mutual sacrifice. And yet what we see in practice is dominance framed as leadership and ego framed as devotion. And that disconnect becomes impossible to ignore as Cody continues speaking about faith while failing to demonstrate its most basic principles: empathy, accountability, and respect. And the absence of empathy is the most striking because empathy requires the ability to step outside yourself, to understand, At the end of all of this, one thing is painfully clear. This was never really an apology. It was a reflection without accountability, and that is why it fell flat. Christine has already moved on. David has already drawn boundaries, and Cody is still trying to control the narrative instead of facing the harm. And sometimes, closure does not come from words. It comes from accepting that some people are simply unable to give what they never learned to offer.